She had never imagined her day would end like this. Not in the office. Not like that. The soft hum of fluorescent lights overhead was the only sound in the room as she stood frozen, mouth slightly open, and her heart trying to catch up with what her ears had just heard. Moments ago, her mind had been cluttered with thoughts of spreadsheets, deadlines, and the lingering pressure of next quarter's projection. And now, as if time had decided to throw her into an alternate dimension, she was staring at the CEO of one of the largest marketing firms in the city, his voice still echoing in her ears as she tried to process the words. He had proposed to her, not a business proposal. Not a job offer, a marriage proposal. For weeks, maybe even months, she had sensed something shifting between them. Small things, like the way he lingered a moment too long after meetings, how he asked questions not just about her work but about her life. He remembered things, her favorite coffee order, the way she always brought lemon slices for her water, the story she told once about her grandmother's garden, but she chalked it up to him being an observant leader, someone who cared about employee morale. Not someone who would kneel in the middle of her corner office with a velvet box in his hand and eyes that didn't waver. He wasn't the type you said no to easily. Miles Rowan was calculated, confident, and sharp in a way that could slice through silence like glass. Everyone admired him. Some feared him, but no one ignored him. He built the company from a two-person startup in a garage to a global brand, and he did it by being 10 steps ahead of everyone else in the room, including, until now, her. She stared at the ring. It was classic, a simple yet stunning solitaire that glinted even in the pale light of the office, and she felt a tremor in her chest. This was not how she had envisioned her love life, if she'd allowed herself to envision one at all. Her career had consumed her 20s, and now, in her early 30s, she had finally carved a space for herself in the executive realm, earned not by favors, but by fierce determination. And now the man at the very top had chosen her, not just as an employee, not just as a confidant, but as something else entirely, as a partner, a future. Miles, she finally managed, her voice quieter than she expected, like it had to tiptoe out of her throat. "What are you doing?" He remained kneeling, his expression unreadable to most, but she could see it, the flicker of vulnerability underneath the charm. His eyes searched hers not with the hunger of conquest, but with the depth of someone who had waited for the right moment and risked everything for it. "Something I should have done a long time ago," he said. Her hand trembled slightly, and she reached up to push a lock of hair behind her ear, buying time, searching for logic in a moment that defied it. She thought back over the last year, to the late nights, the strategic dinners, the planning sessions that somehow always felt like more than just work. How many times had he stayed just a little longer after everyone left? How often had his advice strayed from corporate and wandered gently into personal? But still... "This... I don't understand," she whispered. "This isn't... You're my boss." His lips curved slightly. "I'm also a man who's fallen in love with you." The sentence landed on her like a wave, warm and heavy and undeniable. Her thoughts scrambled to resist it, to tell her this was reckless, career-ending, something out of a poorly written office romance novel. But her heart, stubborn and traitorous, fluttered at the truth in his voice. She remembered the first time she'd met him. Fresh out of grad school, dressed too formally, voice too rehearsed, she had walked into his office with trembling hands and a determination to prove herself. He had barely glanced up from his laptop, then paused, studied her, and asked the one question that changed everything. "What do you want out of this place?" Not where she saw herself in 5 years, not how she planned to contribute, just what she wanted. It was the first time anyone had asked her that. She hadn't known then. She thought it was the title, the success, the money, and maybe it was, back then. But now, standing in a room where time had gone quiet, she realized that what she wanted had changed. Maybe because of him. Maybe in spite of him. "I need to think," she said, more to herself than him. "Take all the time you need." he replied gently, rising to his feet with grace that somehow made her feel even more unsteady. He didn't press her, didn't try to convince her, just gave her one last look, soft, open, terrifying, and walked out, leaving the door slightly ajar behind him. She stood there long after he was gone, pulse echoing in her ears, the ring box still open on the table like a question waiting to be answered. She left the office late that evening, far later than usual, though she had done no real work. The city outside had softened into dusk, buildings lit with the warm glow of 1,000 offices where lives ticked forward under artificial light. Her heels clicked against the polished concrete floor of the lobby as she walked past the security guard, who gave her the same polite nod he always did. She nodded back without really seeing him. Her mind was too loud, too full of what had just happened. The ring, the look in his eyes, the way he said it, as if it wasn't a question but a confession. She took the long way home. Her apartment was only 15 minutes from the office, but she walked down quieter streets, ones lined with trees and soft lights instead of taxis and neon. Her phone buzzed several times and she didn't check it. She already knew who it was. Probably Elena, her best friend. The one person who could see through her masks. She'd have to tell her eventually. But not now. Now she needed space to breathe, to untangle what this meant. She kept seeing his face, not the CEO mask, not the one that held boardrooms in the palm of its hand, but the version she saw in quiet moments, when he asked her about her parents, when he remembered how she took her tea, when he laughed at her terrible jokes during budget reviews. There was always something restrained about him. Like he lived with too many walls inside him, and only recently had she realized that he let her into some of those rooms no one else ever saw. She told herself it was harmless. She was loyal, professional, but if she was being honest with herself, and for once she wanted to be, she had felt something too, and it scared her. When she finally got home, the apartment felt unfamiliar. She dropped her keys on the counter, kicked off her shoes, and sat on the edge of her sofa like a guest in her own space. The city view outside her floor-to-ceiling windows was blurred by a mist she hadn't realized had started. Even the weather seemed confused tonight. She stared into the dimness, the silence interrupted only by the low hum of traffic 20 floors below. Her thoughts spiraled. What did this mean for her job? Her future? What if she said no? What if she said yes? Could she really be in love with her boss? She reached for the ring box she had slipped into her purse. She hadn't even realized she'd taken it with her, and opened it again. The diamond caught the light in a way that made her heart lurch. It was elegant, understated, just like him. Not flashy, not meant to impress anyone but her. The next morning she woke early, despite barely sleeping. She got ready mechanically, choosing a neutral blouse and dark slacks, hair pinned back, no makeup, but lip balm. She didn't want to look like anything other than herself, stripped down, unreadable. She needed to see him, to speak to him, not as her boss, not as the man who owned the company, but as the person who had thrown her entire world off its axis last night. When she arrived, the office was quiet, the usual bustle of assistants and junior analysts not yet at full speed. She walked past the reception desk with a faint nod, eyes straight ahead, hands trembling slightly inside the pockets of her coat. She didn't knock on his door. She never had to. He always told her to come in. He looked up from his desk, and for a moment the usual calm in his eyes flickered. She saw hope there, but also fear, maybe even regret. She closed the door behind her and sat in the chair across from him, the one she'd sat in 100 times before. This time, it felt different, like the room was smaller, or maybe the distance between them had grown impossibly wide. "I didn't sleep," she said softly. "I didn't either." "Why now?" she asked, folding her hands to keep them still. "Why me?" He leaned back in his chair, and for once, he didn't look like a CEO. He looked like a man who had been holding something in for far too long. "Because I realized I couldn't pretend anymore. I've been waiting for the right time, and then I realized there is no right time for this. There's only the truth. And the truth is, I fell for you a long time ago, I thought I could handle it, that I could compartmentalize, but then you started laughing at my awful metaphors during presentations and remembering the things I said offhand, and you started looking at me like you saw the man, not the suit, and I couldn't ignore it anymore." She swallowed hard. "But we work together." "I know. You run the company." "I do. There are rules, ethics, reputations. People will say I did it for the job, for the perks, for the... Do you care what they say?" he asked gently, cutting through her spiral with that uncanny focus he always had. She didn't answer immediately. She looked out the window instead, watching a pigeon land on the edge of the glass, its head tilting as if it were watching her too. "I care about what I feel," she said finally, "and I don't know what that is yet." "That's fair." He stood and came around the desk slowly, like he didn't want to startle her. Then he sat on the edge of it, close, but not too close, his voice quieter now. "This isn't a demand, or a deadline. This is just me, being honest. I'd step away if I had to, sell the company, hand it off to someone else, if it meant I could have a chance with you." Her head snapped toward him. "You'd give up all this?" He nodded. "What's the point of building an empire if you're alone in it?" That broke something in her. Or maybe it built something new. But she still didn't have the answer. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Meetings were held, emails were sent, presentations reviewed. At least outwardly, she went through the motions. Internally, everything was different. The office felt like a new place. Each glance in the hallway, every coffee run, every ping on her phone carrying the weight of something unspoken. She caught herself looking at him when she shouldn't have. Noticed how often he looked at her and then looked away. They had always shared a rhythm, a professional synchronicity that others admired but never questioned. Now it felt like walking a tightrope with no safety net below. She didn't tell anyone, not even Elena, though her friend kept texting her throughout the day demanding their usual after-work catch-up. She couldn't bring herself to face questions she didn't know how to answer, because deep down, she was afraid of how quickly her heart had started considering the possibility. Afraid of how much she wanted to believe him. And most of all, afraid of what it would cost if she did. 3 days passed like that. No mention of the proposal, no awkward confrontations, just space. Miles gave it to her like he promised. And in his silence, she found something she didn't expect. Clarity. She remembered all the moments that had led here, scattered throughout the last 18 months like breadcrumbs she had refused to see. The day her dog died unexpectedly and she came into work just to distract herself. How he'd canceled his lunch meetings to sit with her in the break room, saying nothing, just being there. The late-night pitch they worked on together for an impossible client. How he'd walked her home afterward in the freezing rain, holding his jacket over her even though he was soaked. The look on his face when she got promoted. Like he was proud. Like it meant something to him that it was her. She wasn't naive. She'd worked long enough in this world to know how rare it was to find genuine connection, especially in high places, where people wore masks like uniforms. But with him, the mask slipped. And when they did, something real was always beneath them. So, on the 4th morning, she walked into his office unannounced, like she used to. He was mid-call, but the second he saw her, he paused, nodded slightly to the person on the other end and said, "I'll call you back." He stood uncertain, hopeful. "I'm not saying yes," she said, and he froze. "But I'm not saying no either." Relief passed over his face like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. She stepped closer. "I need time, not just to think, but to feel this out. I don't want something impulsive. I want to be sure." "You deserve that," he said quietly. "Take as long as you need." "But," she added, and something in her voice made his brows lift. "I think we both know this isn't just going to disappear." "No," he said, voice low. "It won't." That weekend they met for coffee. Not at the office, not in a suit, not surrounded by colleagues. Just the two of them. In a small cafe tucked away on a street lined with antique shops and flowering balconies. She wore jeans and a sweater. He showed up in a button-down and no tie, looking far more like a man than a mogul. They didn't talk about the company. They talked about childhoods, about favorite books, about the first time each of them had their hearts broken. He told her about his mother, who raised him alone, who used to say, "Success means nothing if you have no one to share it with." She told him about the piano lessons her father forced her into, and how she hated them until the night she played at his retirement party and saw him cry. They walked afterward, aimlessly, letting the spring air settle between them. He didn't try to hold her hand. She didn't try to stop her smile. Something was happening, quietly, something both of them knew couldn't be rushed. Over the next few weeks, they kept their distance at work, carefully professional, almost too careful, but outside those glass walls they explored each other slowly. Dinner on Thursdays, long phone calls after midnight, walks through the city when no one was watching. They found comfort in the in-between. No labels, no announcements, just two people learning how to fit into each other's world. And yet, the weight of the decision still loomed. Because if she said yes, really said yes, it meant everything would change. The company would react, people would whisper, HR would get involved. She'd likely have to resign or take a leave, at the very least. Her identity as a professional built brick by brick over a decade would be questioned by people who didn't know the story, who didn't see the quiet moments that led here. He told her he'd protect her, that he'd step down if it came to that. And she believed him. But that wasn't the point. She didn't want protection. She wanted respect. She wanted to be seen not as the woman the CEO fell for, but as someone who deserved to be chosen, not just by him, but by her own life. One night, weeks later, they stood on the rooftop of his apartment. The city stretched below them like a living map of everything they'd ever known. He handed her a glass of wine and said nothing, just looked at her with that calm patience that had always unnerved and comforted her at once. She turned to face him fully. "When you proposed that night, I was terrified. I know. Not because I didn't feel something, but because I felt everything." His eyes softened. "I still don't have all the answers," she said, stepping closer. "But I know this, I've never met someone who makes me want to risk everything." He reached out, slowly, and touched her cheek. She leaned into it. "And I don't want to wonder what would have happened if I said no." A silence passed between them, not empty, but full. He didn't say anything, just pulled her into a slow, quiet embrace that spoke more than any words could. And somewhere, deep in her chest, the answer began to form, not rushed, not dramatic, just real. Just hers. Monday came too fast. It always did after a weekend that felt more like a dream than real time. She slipped back into her work armor, pencil skirt, soft blouse, hair up, calm expression. Though now she knew how fragile that calm really was. The office felt different. Not because of anything specific, but because everything had started to shift beneath the surface. It was like standing on glass with cracks too fine to see, but real enough to feel. He kept his distance at work, as promised. But she caught his glance once in a meeting with the CEO, a quick flick of his eyes toward her across the boardroom. A half smile that disappeared the moment someone else looked his way. No one else knew. No one suspected. At least not yet. But that wouldn't last forever. Whispers traveled faster than truth in places like this. Especially when power and affection tangled together in the same room. By Thursday it started. She noticed it in small things, the change in tone from a colleague she usually got lunch with, the sudden quiet when she walked into a room, the glance two junior execs exchanged behind a clipboard. She heard her name once, softly, quickly, when she turned a corner too fast, and then, late that afternoon, her assistant closed the office door and said, carefully, "There's a rumor." She didn't need to ask what kind, she already knew. It hit her like cold water to the face. The world she'd spent so long building, carefully, perfectly, with late nights and double effort and no shortcuts, was now under a lens. And the worst part wasn't the rumor itself, it was the implication. That everything she had achieved was because she was involved with him, that she hadn't earned it, that she had traded something sacred for something hollow. That night, she didn't go to his place. She walked the streets instead, long into the dark, letting the city pull her into its hum. She thought about quitting, just walking away from it all, letting them have the story, the office, the judgment. But she also thought about the first time she led a team to a major win, about the younger women on her staff who saw her as a mentor, about the way she had built herself, not for a man, not for a company, but because she refused to be overlooked. She called him around midnight. His voice was thick with concern, before she even spoke. "They know," she said. There was silence on the line. "Let me handle it," he said after a moment. "I can take the fall." "No," she said quickly. "If you do that, it'll only make it worse. They'll think you're protecting me." "I am protecting you. I don't want protection. I want truth." The next morning, she walked into the office with her head high. She didn't wear the usual neutral tones. She wore red. Not loud, not inappropriate, but bold, confident, a reminder. Before she even sat down, HR called her in. The meeting was clinical, full of words like conflict of interest and optics and organizational integrity. She listened quietly, nodded when she had to, didn't flinch when they implied she had crossed lines that she knew damn well she hadn't. Afterward, she walked straight to his office, closed the door behind her, and locked it. "They're pushing me to resign." He stood from his chair so fast it scraped the floor. "No," he said. "Absolutely not. They think it's easier to lose me than to deal with the fallout of people talking." He crossed the room, the CEO fire back in his eyes. "Then I'll resign." Her breath caught. "They'll accept that even less," she said. "You're the face of the company." He looked at her then, really looked at her. Not as someone who needed saving, but as someone he saw as his equal, his partner, someone whose dignity was just as valuable as his own. "What do you want?" he asked. "Not what's easiest. What's right?" She didn't answer right away, because she needed to know for sure. She'd spent too much of her life second-guessing herself. Not now. Not about this. So she walked out, didn't speak to him, for 2 days. Not because she was angry, but because she needed silence to find her own voice beneath the noise. She spoke to legal, to friends outside the company, to mentors she hadn't reached out to in years. She asked questions, hard ones, about power dynamics and perceptions and precedent. She wasn't just deciding about love, she was deciding about her legacy. When she came back, she asked for a meeting, not with him, with the board. It was the boldest thing she'd ever done. She sat across from 10 powerful people in suits who controlled the fate of the company and, by extension, hers, and she told them everything, not in the way they expected, not defensive, not apologetic, but honest. She told them how it started, how careful they had been, how nothing happened during performance reviews or promotions, how she had never accepted any personal benefit from her connection with him, how she had considered leaving, and how, in the end, she didn't want to lose herself over fear. She ended with a choice. "I'm not asking for approval, I'm offering transparency. If you think I can't lead without bias, I'll step down. But if you think I've earned my place here, and I believe I have, then let me prove it." There was silence in the room after that. Long, still silence. Then someone said, "You're braver than half the people who sit on this side of the table." And the tide began to turn. He waited outside the boardroom, leaning against the wall like someone who had surrendered to time. When she stepped out, she didn't say anything at first, just walked toward him, calm and unreadable. He straightened, eyes searching hers. "Well?" he asked, voice quieter than usual. "I'm staying," she said. Relief flooded his face, so quickly and visibly that it nearly undid her. "They believed me," she added. "But more importantly, I believed me." He reached for her hand, cautious even now, and she let him take it. "I don't want to hide anymore," she said. "But I also don't want this to define me." "It won't. It can't," she corrected gently. He nodded. Then let's define it ourselves. That evening they left together, not as secrets, not as a scandal, but as people who had walked through fire and still chose each other on the other side. There was no dramatic kiss in the rain, no headlines, just two tired hearts, finally resting in the same rhythm. Weeks passed, whispers faded, the world moved on, as it always did. But she didn't forget. Not the weight of the choice, not the price of honesty, and not the moment he asked her, quietly and simply, one evening on her balcony, "So, is your answer still maybe?" She smiled, leaned against him, and said, "No, it's yes." And that was it. No fanfare, no grand announcement, just yes. And everything that came after.